Botani and welcome to the Sheds. It's 2024. It's election year. Political parties and independent candidates are jostling for attention.
What do we actually have outside the ANC? It's a fear to say, I think we've yet to get to a point where we can imagine, me as a voter, what does it mean to live outside the ANC? And maybe it's also a bit of a fear from us as citizens to say, in as much as we blame opposition parties, maybe we're not ready to say, look, we want to move away from this party. I always say, look, when I come from the Val, when you come from the Val used to be a very beautiful place. Yet I always get surprised people at home still vote ANC.
Yeah.
I got family in KZN, you go to the Eastern Cape, people still don't, maybe I'll say KZN is a bit different. They used to have the IFP, so the older generation can imagine a place without the ANC.
But if you check on social media spaces, they're talking about 2024 being their 1994. What does that mean?
Well, I always say, look, we kind of always have to step back and ask, let's be real, right? I get social media exists, but it's not really real. Because if you look at the numbers of people actually on social media, what is it, 0.5 of the population? So it's people, one, who've got access to it. And it's people, look, for me, if you don't put your real name and where you live, I can't really take you serious.
Botani and welcome to the Sheds. It's 2024. It's election year. Political parties and independent candidates are jostling for attention, launching manifestos, trying to convince you to vote for them. Today, we're shedding light on elections, everything you need to know about what is happening in the country's political landscape. Joining us is Dr. TK Pooe, a PhD holder. I'm not one called a doctor.
Welcome, Dr. TK.
Welcome to the Sheds.
No, thanks for having me.
Yeah, you seem relaxed about being called a doctor. Are you scared that you might find out your PhD is not necessarily a PhD?
No.
Or vets might say they don't know you.
No, they should know me then. But
They verified you.
Hey, we had to go through like a whole month of verification.
You are responsible for public policy.
Yeah, it's a specialty I look at as public policy and look at things like local government, institutional planning, SOEs and the like.
We had an IEC representative, a CEO recently, telling us that there are 265 political parties that are currently in their database. And all of them are actually interested in the attention of a voter. What would you say, as we stand, is the country's political landscape, the dynamics that are out there politically?
It's funny you say 364. We just need one more and then 2024 is a leap year, right?
Yes.
Like 366. So we're just short of one.
I'm sorry to not. Some guys, please.
It's coming. It's
cooking.
No, look, I think I always say, look, there's nothing wrong with having options. I think it's a good thing. It also maybe speaks to one of two things. One, it also says maybe, look, I always call it political entrepreneurship. People are spotting opportunities. It says out of the big parties we have, and I think we all know who they are. Started from the ANC going down. It's kind of saying maybe they are spotting an opportunity that, look, the big parties aren't giving it. That's one. But I think secondly, which is a bit more worrying, it sort of says that the country doesn't really have a sense of direction. People, and I always make this point too when I speak to students or even people, or even companies, is a lot of political parties are stuck in what I call the gaze of the ANC.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody knows what the ANC is not doing. They complain about the ANC. But we've yet to come to a point where people can say, look, this is a definitive number 2 party in the country. And I think that's where the problem comes when we have too many parties, because it's kind of saying, look, the DA, which, if I'm not mistaken, out of the 2019, the ANC got about 10.3 million votes. And then the DA came in with 3 million and then came in on the other parties. So it's basically saying, look, DA, you're not doing your job as the official opposition. And I know people then say, that means the EFF. The EFF came in like a distant third. And then you have your IFP, Freedom Front Plus, which we cannot forget. So for me, it's kind of saying that we don't have a definitive number 2, which people are saying, outside of the ANC, this is who we're going for. And I think that's a problematic thing for me.
Just to jump in there, Doctor, and I'm glad that you spoke about that, not having a definitive opposition. In a lot of opposition parties that we have in the country seems to be, picking, pointing holes at what the ANC is not doing, but they're not telling us what they're offering. How would you describe that? How would you, say this is the reason why this is not happening? We don't have opposition here.
I point to, look, to be kind to them. I think there's a British politician who said, being in opposition it's the worst position you can be in. Because you kind of have to shout, one, that I exist, I exist. to remind people, like you say, the voices that exist. But it's also too, in the South African sense, is that I always say this in policy terms, and we've yet to have a party which says, listen, outside of what the ANC does, this is what we are confident in offering you. When the DA speaks, sometimes they themselves seem very confused in terms of what they're offering.
Yeah.
They want to say, look, we're fully free market, but we also understand that there's history, and they get very confused. And then the EFF, while they speak about, the Freedom Charter, I think they say it's a Marxist, Leninist. Look, I'm at university, even I get confused in terms of what does that even mean. And then I think the other one, which we don't touch on a lot, and I'm hoping that we can touch on, is that there's also a definitive fear from voting people to say, look, what do we actually have outside the ANC? It's a fear to say, I think we've yet to get to a point where we can imagine, me as a voter, what does it mean to live outside the ANC? And maybe it's also a bit of a fear from us as citizens to say, in as much as we blame opposition parties, maybe we're not ready to say, look, we want to move away from this party. I always say, look, when I come from the Val, when you come from the Val used to be a very beautiful place. Yet I always get surprised people at home still vote ANC.
Yeah.
I got family in KZN, you go to the Eastern Cape, people still don't. Maybe I'll say KZN is a bit different. They used to have the IFP, so the older generation can imagine a place without the ANC. But if you go to places like the Eastern Cape and you speak to people, they're like, guys, this place is a province which has fallen apart. And they can tell you, Ikomolos, what else is there? And I think maybe that's what we should be focused on.
You say people keep voting the ANC, yet the number of political parties, meaning the options, keep increasing. The CEO from IEC was saying in the last elections in 2019, there were about 43 political parties which were contesting for elections, and just contesting as we have more than 300 registered now. What do you attribute the number of political parties that are out there? One, is it starvation, meaning people see a quick buck opportunity in the politics? Or two, is it because the ruling party, which is the ANC, has failed the people who are not voting for it? Or why do you think there seems to be so many options and yet people keep voting for the same political party?
I'd say it's a mixture of what you've said. One, look, the threshold in South Africa is very low. Think about it. If you are a single party, and let's say you make it to Gauteng legislature or any legislature, and you then maybe make it to, you don't even have to make it to national. That's guaranteed money. That's why I call it political entrepreneurship.
Yes.
And then from you having this one representative, you can hire 5 to 6 people. You've got a budget, right? That's patronage.
Stuff in the office.
Yeah, you've got stuff in the office. You can be your cousin, your nephew. You created political entrepreneurship. So that's one. The other thing is, again, like I said, South African voters, look, it's not a secret. Everybody knows the ANC is messed up. I always tell people, you don't need people like me to tell you the ANC is messed up. You just walk out of your street. We all see the ANC is messed up. What we are not seeing is options. And that's why I say, okay, South Africans also like trying things, right? Now, I can guarantee you MK is going to get a few votes. Mr. Songeza Zibi Rice are going to get a few votes. Why? Because they've seen it with the EFF, COPE. You even have to go back to the UDM when the general left the ANC. South Africans like trying new things, but it's all in an effort to say, it's not that we hate the ANC. It's just that we've yet to see something which is a proper alternative to the ANC.
Doctor, I want to put you on the spot to say, before we went to the break, I wanted to find out about, if you go, especially young people that we know are not voters, but if you check on social media spaces, they're talking about 2024 being their 1994. What does that mean? Do you think, we know every time when elections come, we say these are the anticipated elections ever seen. And even this year again, we have that going on. What does it mean? Are we going to see any shifts, major shifts?
Well, I always say, look, we kind of always have to step back and ask, let's be real, right? I get social media exists, but it's not really real. Because if you look at the numbers of people actually on social media, what is it, 0.5 of the population? So it's people, one, who've got access to it. And it's people, look, for me, if you don't put your real name and where you live, I can't really take you seriously. You can say anything on there, right? But, and also the question of this is our 1994. I'm not a fan of that. I know the rise. Because, look, it kind of diminishes what 1994 was. Now, I get that a lot of voters, this is people's first time voting. But some of us, we've got grandparents, we've got parents who are alive to say, listen, it was a monumental thing. Some of us are old enough. I didn't vote. So I'm not saying I voted. But I remember the peace, the dove. It was a major thing. So I don't think we should diminish it. And look, every vote is important historically, right?
Okay.
What I think this basically represents is to say, listen, we've come to a point of where questions have been asked of the governing party. For me, I look, I think the ANC is going to decline. I'm not one of those who says, look, they're going to go to 40. No. It will be a question of, do they decline to 48 or 50?
Okay.
What for me this is an election of is to say, is the opposition ready? Because I think that's the question we should be asking. Because I always say, just speaking to people, to say, listen, for instance, you talk about the economic freedom, the freedom fighters, right?
Yes.
We kind of sometimes always say they're next in line. But I always ask the question, if they couldn't get rid of President Jacob Zuma through the ballot, I'm not going to speak about King Mafurefere,
Yes.
politics of the night.
Yeah.
If they couldn't get rid of him, how do they get rid of President Cyril Ramaphosa? The DA, I think the DA has almost sort of given up. They've accepted that, listen, this Western Cape is our thing.
Yeah.
And people also forget, because if you listen to the DA, people make it seem like the DA's got 60% in the Western Cape. That's not the case. It's around 56.
Yeah.
And Gator McKenzie is coming.
Okay.
So the question I always ask people is to
Is
say,
he a bigger threat to
oh yeah, it's a
DA?
colored vote.
Yeah.
It's not. It's if you even look at what's happened over the weekend with the DA and the people that they're losing. Now, usually they're used to losing black people. It's fine, but it's the Muslim vote which is quite big in the Western Cape. So the bigger question I'd ask if I was trying to be nefarious is to say, who's more likely to keep what they have, the DA in the Western Cape or the ANC in Gauteng? Because that for me is what's interesting. And then it brings us to the point you say young people. And I think your IEC representative would have also told you the biggest voting bloc
Yes.
are people who are not voting, who are not coming out,
Yeah.
right?
So they're busy there on Twitter, on social
some of
media,
them are on
but they don't
Twitter,
go.
some of
Yeah.
them are, and this is why I find problematic about young people. Some of them have just given up. You know, it's one thing to say, you know, I'm going to be voicing,
Yeah.
you do your thing. But people who just say, I don't care. And we can kind of understand the reasons why. Like I said, when I go home to the Val, people don't have jobs. People have literally given up on the system. Nyaupe is all around the street. And that for me is probably the bigger thing, is that when people then say, I don't care about politics, what do people invest their time in? And that means we'll never get the right people into the system.
Yeah.
And that for me is a bigger worry. When people say, I don't care, that block which is sitting at home.
If you were to advise political parties, what would you say in order to appeal and be attractive to the electorate? What should they do?
My field of study is I'm not going to come tell you here, go do promos, give people shares, right? You should have done your job 5 years ago. For me, I always say, listen, the first thing you can start off is let's go first to our ward. Have you actually been to people's ward? If you're a serious political party, you should have started 5 years ago to say, listen, let's actually introduce ourselves to the streets. I think one of the things we've sort of left behind, especially as African people, is we don't know who our representatives are. Oh, you're like, oh, Muto, get representative.
Yeah.
Since when?
Yeah, man. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think you should have started 4 years ago. And then to actually say, work on it week by week. Say, guys, on a monthly basis, we're actually going to sit down and say, what's wrong with our ward? Because I think that's what we're missing, a political party that will go down to the ground and say, listen, you can see I'm not in an election yet. I'm here to say, what are your issues? And see what I stand for. Because we have a lot of everybody seems to swing and say, okay, look, what do you want me? No, I want you to say, listen, this is what I stand for. 1, let's actually get the streets working.
Okay.
2, let's actually bring businesses into our communities. And now I want to say a few things which people are controversial. You might not like them, but people like Put South Africa First. What's the other one?
The Parliament, Soweto Parliament.
Soweto Parliament, or the organization which is saying, let's relook at foreigners.
Foreigners, yes.
Yeah. Look, it's not a popular thing to say, but at least they actually seem to get what's the heartbeat of people. Speak to things like that, you know, and actually say, build that up for 4 years, right? Because one thing I know about our communities is if we see that you're doing well on the street, the next street will ask about you and to build that. And that's the one thing the ANC's always had over these parties. The ANC, for good or bad or worse, I mean, when my mother and father go to church, look, the ANC is there on the street. We don't like them, but they're there. When you meet your uncle who's a mechanic, they're there. For me, these political parties seem to only mushroom at election time. And then they say things which we think as a community, like, who are you exactly representing? And so I think it's an issue of saying, outside an election, yes, start at the street, hear what people are saying, and be brave to say, listen, this is what I represent.
If people, like it is in South Africa, are poor, education is not free, crime rate is high, and basically people are struggling on a daily basis for one thing or another, why do you think we continue to have a low voter turnout come the election day? Why is it that while a person has been struggling for 4 years, come the 5th year,
Yeah.
they still don't feel the urge to go out and cast their vote. What causes that? And yet, voting is the only system of governing the country.
And this brings us to the issue which I always cry about. We don't have, the people know that there's no policy. I don't want to hear about your drama in your party. That you fired, man, this person's starting what. What our political parties miss is what's the economic policy. You see, and people, look, you don't have to go macro and say, look, they're interested. No. People know that all these political parties are devoid of economic policy. Now, I understand some might say, listen, it's good that we want to nationalize without compensation. That is great. Good for you. But what does it mean for me on the street? And I think we have political parties and oppositions that lack the ability to say, listen, this is what our economy must stand on, but related to someone on the street to say, look, if I'm in Soweto, the biggest thing at the moment is services industry, which is a big mall and the servicing around that, right? How then, what do you build in Soweto? Can you actually build industry there? So I think that's a conversation people are not hearing, and they're saying, listen, why must I go listen to someone tell me about political dreams they're having? I want the bread and butter.
You spoke about political parties not really speaking to the heartbeat of what people want. But I wanted to find out, to draw into conversation, to say a lot of what is that these political parties that are wanting to contest for the first time in the likes of you, even Rise Mzansi, your MK. What is that do you think they'll be bringing on the table, given the fact that, a lot of promises that they're making, they've been made before. And after the dust has settled after elections day and then we've counted the votes, who's going to come out victorious?
Well, I think a lot of them are going to tell us, look, for instance, you can almost segment them. Like Rise of Mzansi, one can say it's a throwback to what's termed a social democrat, which is to say they are of what the old ANC used to represent, which is you believe that the economy should be well looked after. It's not that you're necessarily going to trim and take everything away from the ANC. You believe that the ANC has kind of gone a bit overboard with some of the offerings of social services. And look, the MK is interesting because you have a former president who is there. And the question I always ask is to say, but it seems like when you become a former president, then you become more free. Where you're not supposed to do these things when you're there. So again, I can tell he's going to touch on the Freedom Charter. And if I'm not mistaken, he said, look, the only thing wrong with the ANC is that they're no longer the ANC. So I don't really see anything there. But look, the key thing for me is it's going to be, they'll get their votes 1 or 2, which is fine. But is it really going to touch on the major thing that you're asking for? And I'm like, I don't think so. If anything, my wish would be, and this is where I'm very big on, I think we should really be questioning these guys to say, why don't you guys just come together? I think there's a lot of them who are too many. It's too many, right? To say, listen, sit down in a public hall, go to Orlando, sit down with people and really tell us, look, what's your economic policy? And I can tell you a lot of them just kind of convert. It's just a few things here and there. And then to say, look, if that's the point, why are you guys then taking all this oxygen away from others? Just come together. And I think there's a saying from American football, which is to say, for them, they've got their number 10, who basically does everything. If you've got more than one number 10, you've got no party. And I think that's the issue. We've got too many political parties. And I always say, we've got too many chiefs, but we don't have too many followers, right? And we don't have servant leaders in this country. Because the issue would be, if you really you think about the resources, how much it takes to put up a poster, to put all this in Orlando, to get the ground forces working. If we honestly have people who are willing to say, listen, I'm willing to be a number 3 in the party. I always say this, Mr. Musi Maimani is great on education. When he speaks about the default of education,
he's passionate about it.
He's passionate. Why can't you say, listen, I'm not going to be president, but I'm going to be the head of education policy. Mr. Songezi Zibi seems to like the economy. Okay, that's what you do. And then Mr. Gaten McKenzie is very big and on the issue of foreigners. On the borders, let's put you there. And then to say, then just find somebody who might not be president, but a chairman who puts all of you guys together. That's it. But yet you guys want to all be chiefs in the party.
I want you to help a voter. One, it's clear that political parties are not going to match. They won't come together. Each of them wants to go on their own.
But they tell us they want to have a coalition.
Yes. Now, a coalition will come after, and voters will not have a role in how the coalition must take place. But at the end of the day, a voter will be presented with a ballot paper and a box in which to cast a vote. What should voters be looking for? What is it that voters should look at and say, this political party looks like the guy who means what they say, or looks like the guy who can look after my interest? What is it? I mean, there are manifestos launched already. Many will be launched. Each party has their policy. Some parties are louder than others. Some are more visible than others. But at the end of the day, it comes down to an electorate. Help an electorate choose. Even if you don't mention exactly the party itself, but you can if you want. But what must I look for as I walk into the voting booth?
Look, the one thing I'd say, find find a regional party. You know, if the party can say, listen, at least we've got roots in Gauteng or the Eastern Cape, or we've had that history. That's the one thing you look for, because that basically means at least you can know somebody or you can get hold of them somehow, right? Two, look, what's most pressing to you, and I think we can all agree, it's the economy, right? So let's actually look at parties that speak about the economy. And three, and this is one where it's like I said, we as my job, I could tell you about policy, but I always say it's not my job to tell you who to vote for. But it's a question of saying what can you live with for the next 5 years. But four, and this is what I'm going to emphasize, and I always say this, is the question says the day after you vote for X party or B party, are you able not so much to become a member, but can you start saying, how am I going to hold these people accountable? And I always say, as citizens, what we need to be doing is to build strong communities, right? Let's speak to our wards and say, listen, we all know people on the street. Let's say, look, guys, let's actually invite the representatives post-elections.
Yeah.
And then you can see who's honest. Because the ones that don't show up, okay, when you were just a fly-by-night. The ones that show up, invest in that person. Even if you didn't vote for them at that moment in time, at least you could say, this person after an election came. Because the ones that just used you and dumped you, you can then just actually build with them. Because I think we need to get to a point of where I don't like this idea that we as voters are just simply there like cows every 5 years, vote. We need to change our minds to say, listen, we need to hold these people accountable. And unfortunately it means we're going to have to take out the biscuits, take out the oros, and actually invite them to sit down.
But talking about accountability now, to muddy the waters, Dr. Pooe, now with your so-called independence now, you're speaking about parties that you can hold them accountable. How are we going to hold independent candidates accountable? Should they get some seats?
I think it's going to be the same thing, because remember, the parties are a bit harder. Because look, when you speak to certain people in many parties, they say, listen, this is my personal view, but hey, this party cracks the whip.
Yeah.
I think independence might be interesting to see who cracks their whip, type of thing. That's what I'm saying. For me, we need to really get to a point of having politics of holding individuals to account. And the minute that starts to change, I think it can be for the better. Until we do that, and like I said, it's going to take more than 5 years, unfortunately, because we've kind of painted ourselves into a mess over the last 3 decades.
Elections must be held within 3 months after the last government was configured. That takes us to between May and August. When would you advise it's best to hold the election? If the president were to call you and say, TK, I want to tell these people when we're voting, but I'm not sure, May, June, July, August, when would you advise?
Don't hold it in winter, because load shedding. Load shedding would embarrass you. That's one.
Okay.
And also, we're going to see this as a new phenomenon. Be strategic, right? You want to hold it when it's a bit cold in the Western Cape to suppress the vote of certain parties.
Okay.
You don't want to hold it when ESCOM is going to let you down. So it'll probably be, let's say, probably a month or a few weeks before winter, when things are, you can still control what ESCOM looks like. So I'd put it around.
Or should we stock up on candles?
No. If you hold it during winter, you're going to be embarrassed.
Just 2 quick things, then 30 seconds. Your views on the Cape independence and your view on the merging of the Eastern Cape and Western Cape to have 4 provinces.
On merging provinces, I think we should just get away with provinces altogether. They should not exist. We should have municipalities. Cape independence is utter nonsense in an African country, if you can say that. But then you have to also look at the history of the Western Cape. They've always had this belief, even during apartheid. So it's nothing new, but it's absolute nonsense, and we should not really entertain it. And we can get rid of it by simply getting rid of provinces. Orania, look, they exist only because of the weakness of the fact that we allow it to exist. That's about it. But I think there's nothing wrong with us now saying, listen, why can't Soweto with all its economy start asking, say, listen, why must we be under the city of Joburg? Type of thing. So I think it's a question of economics. When you've got the power, you can say many things. So maybe it should be making us also think, how do we get our places right so that we can start to control who goes in, who goes out? But the key thing would be there is no way in an African country a minority.
Thank you very much. We've been watching the Shed Shedding Light on the country's political debate. Dr. TK Pooe, a PhD holder, who actually holds the PhD. You can go and check with that. Actually was helping us to understand these issues. Thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.